This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
Nearly 20 million cars and trucks have sped by this spot. Nearly 9,000 nights have come and gone since what appeared to be a routine traffic stop here changed the town of Jonesville forever.
At approximately 2:42 a.m. while conducting a traffic stop on Interstate 77 South, Sergeant Greg Martin was shot and killed.
Greg Martin was just 30 years old, but already a police sergeant when he made one more traffic stop that night in early October of 1996 and paid for it in the most gruesome of ways.
Nobody didn't deserve to get shot like he did, 6 times in the head.
Pretty cold-blooded.
I've used the word executed while you're doing your job. It's basically what it was.
Lloyd Terry is one of the officers whose job it was to solve the case.
That night, Greg Martin was working for the Jonesville Police Department. He was working alone. He radioed into the sheriff's office that he was going to be out with a suspicious person near the Huddle House restaurant.
This is that radio call. It's the last one Greg Martin would ever make.
You were Greg's friend?
I was.
Van Tate was a state trooper who was also working the area that night.
I was about 10 miles south on 421, and we were working a fatality down there. I heard him several times call him. He said, I'm out with a vehicle on I-77. He said, I'm 10-4, but I'm going to need your assistance. And that didn't sound like Greg, because Greg was a good officer. You know, as a law enforcement officer, you get a feeling about it. And something just didn't sound right.
When Tate came around the front of Martin's cruiser, he found out how wrong it all went.
The thing that ran through my mind was, well, is the shooter still here?
You look at that and you must think, that could be me.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm still working on it.
Greg's daughter, Brittany, was 6 years old at the time and with her mother when the call came into the house.
And all she would say is, oh no. And I go in the living room and I ask her, I said, Mom, what's wrong? What's going on? And that's when she just looked at me and she said, your daddy's gone. He's not coming back. Whenever I seen him in the casket, that right there was, I swore up and down that it wasn't my dad. It was somebody different. Because I didn't want to see it as him.
Now, when she wants to visit her father,
What do you think when you come out here?
The man that was gone too soon.
Brittany has to come to this graveyard a few miles from town.
It's actually kind of peaceful sometimes.
Her life has been anything but peaceful in the years since.
When it first happened, I used to go around and I was like, yeah, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And I wanted them dead. And then I grew older. I grew wiser. And my grandma started speaking to me, and she made me realize that, that's not God's way.
She's had to navigate her way to adulthood without the father she so cherished there to help guide her.
The mortality, thinking about that I'm really outliving my dad now.
Did you grow up thinking you might not grow old because your dad? Yeah.
Yeah, because where he was killed so young, it kind of made me think, well, anything could happen. So I always learned to cherish the day for the day.
Greg was killed October the 5th of 1996.
And for the next 16 years, it became Jonesville's most vexing mystery.
I think that one day that we will solve this case.
But days soon became years.
We've learned not to get excited about leads in any case.
It comes down to we're just waiting for that one magic phone call. We're following up all the leads that come in, but we're all hoping for that one magic call.
As Sergeant Martin's family suffered through years with no answers.
This pain no one should ever have to feel.
The officers investigating his death had their own pain.
Explain why it's different when it's an officer.
It's a family, it's like a family. And, If you didn't know his family, you will know his family, and you'll grieve with them.
And there was nothing to begin the healing until they found Martin's murderers.
It took a lot of manpower. Of course, it was a murder of a brother police officer, so everybody wanted to solve it.
Why did this one take so long?
If you want to hear my personal opinion, that sometimes you can't open those doors, you can't get over that wall because God above has not allowed you to do that at the time. I'm a man of faith. In this case here, when everything came together, every piece of evidence that we'd collected started making sense, and all the pieces of the puzzle went together quickly.
They had so little to begin with. They didn't even know who Martin had stopped that night.
He never called in a driver's license, per se, like a normal vehicle stop. I can't say whether he had ID or not that night. I'm not exactly sure, but he never called in a driver's license or a name.
In the end, the key was a key to one of the trucks the killers were believed to have been in that night. That led Lloyd Terry to interview a man named Brian Whitaker.
And I've interviewed a lot of people in hundreds of homicides, and my prayer was, Lord, don't let me do anything wrong, because this could be it. This could be what we really need.
It was actually, I think it was October 3rd or October 4th was the day that they told the family. They called us to the Yakinville courthouse, and it'd been quiet for a while. Wasn't expecting nothing. I figured they was going to tell us the case was closed. And Roger Reese has us in a conference room. He looks around and he says, now, I don't want nobody to pass out, but we are pretty sure with about a 99% accuracy, we've got the killer, and we're en route to get him.
Then, right on the anniversary of Greg Martin's death...
Wow, 16 years, and we got him.
They looked like they had an answer.
Everybody's mouth hung open, and nobody really could believe the words, because we had waited so long.
At trial, Whitaker laid out the story of how the other man with him that night, Scott Sika, panicked when Martin stopped them, and that Sika was the one who shot him. Both pled guilty in 2014 and were sentenced to life in prison.
Greg got his justice. Greg's family got their justice, and I got my closure.
So you feel like you've learned the real story that night?
Truthfully, there's a lot of things about this case that haven't come to my knowledge, and I think it's for the best. There's a lot of details that I know a lot of the officers have kind of glided over and not gave me the full play-by-play, detail by detail, even though I've asked and begged them, borrowed and pleaded and begged them to tell me. They knew it was in my best interest not to.
To not spend a lifetime wondering how a father feels as he is dying.
Have you ever thought about what was going through his mind in those moments?
A lot of times that's why I don't sleep. Why Dad didn't ask for help immediately. The actual radio transmission, I wanted to hear it. And they said it was best I didn't hear it. It's best I just leave it be.
It was hard listening, but we know what happened. We went 16 years and not knowing exactly what had happened, and now we know. It doesn't make it any easier, but we're finally starting to get some answers.
You don't normally get bridges named in your memory unless you did something great or your life was cut so short you didn't have time to.
Come out here very often?
As much as I can.
This is the place where the girl who her daddy called Peaches,
Yeah, you can tell we don't come out here that often,
comes to spend a little time with him.
And that's about as good as that's going to get. First, when Dad was first killed, it was really hard to get adjusted to not having a dad around. But as time goes by, you've learned that's the new normal, that nobody has a perfect situation. You become numb to the pain and you just pick up the pieces and move on. Because no matter what you do, you can't bring them back.
But when Greg Martin was shot and killed on what appeared to be a routine traffic stop, Brittany's life changed forever.
I feel sorry for his kids because they don't got a daddy.
Did it dawn on you that you're now as old as your dad ever was?
Yeah. Whenever I hit 30, that was my big eye-opening moment. I've had a lot of issues to deal with that. It took me a while to understand that I outlived my dad.
When Scott Sika was sentenced for Martin's murder in 2014, Brittany had a certain defiance about her.
He took my daddy away from me, but it wasn't going to break me.
But just 2 years earlier, when Sika was first arrested, she already knew how her life was changed forever.
My dad's not going to see me get married. My dad's not going to see me have my first baby. He's not going to be there for all my first. He didn't get to see me at prom.
Although Brittany did try to show it to him.
I remember my prom, my senior prom. I came out here and I was all dressed up. And I went, Dad, look. See my prom dress?
That still weighs heavily on you, I assume?
Drastically. That's one reason I've pushed marriage back for a little while. I've kind of wanted to still have him around.
The person no one will have around anymore is that man convicted of Greg Martin's murder. In April of 2016, Scott Sika committed suicide in prison in Scotland County, North Carolina. But Brittany doesn't harbor any bitterness.
It ain't my place. It ain't for me to judge him. He has to live with what he done.
So you're a woman of faith?
Mm-hmm.
So when you heard that he had killed himself?
I was kind of, in a way, shocked that he did choose to hang himself.
Brittany isn't the only one who has to deal with Greg Martin's loss. The entire town of Jonesville felt it.
I don't think the town will ever get over the fact that we lost him in such a horrific way.
None more than Trooper Van Tate, who was a good friend.
When Greg was working, he'd come by, and my wife and I'd be home, and we'd have him come in and sup with us. And after all this happened, those days were gone.
Tate is the officer who found Martin less than 5 minutes after his death, and that night...
When I finally got into bed, I prayed. I said, God, you've got to help me to get through this. I give all that to God's grace for looking after me and letting me, finish my 30 years in law enforcement.
It's now up to Greg Martin's daughter to finish her life and do it in a way that lives up to her father's example.
My dad was a hero. He wasn't the greatest man by no means. He wasn't perfect. He had his faults. But he died protecting and serving this community.
So one of the things about organized crime in the South is it's never really documented, not the way you think it would be. And that is partly because of the Dixie Mafia myth. If you go through the historical societies in major cities in the South, you can find references to the Dixie Mafia. And when I say find references, I mean you can find whole histories that people have gone through and done sort of genealogically. Mike Gillick Jr. is one of these people. So if you look at one side of this, here's what that sounds like.
From the Biloxi Historical Society page, Michael J. Gillick Jr., born in 1930, was known on the coast as Mike or Mr. Mike. On December 23, 1951, in Harrison County, Mississippi, he married Marlene Redding, the daughter of Oliver Osborne Redding, and Artemisia Kachat, the daughter of Robert Kachat, and Jenny Fryo. They were the parents of Marianne Cecil Gillick, Chino Rose Gillick, Britt Singletary, Michael Joseph Gillick III, and Sandra Lee Suarez. Oliver Osborne Redding, called Osborne, was born at Crystal Springs, Mississippi on October 14, 1904, the son of Walter Armstrong Redden and Frances Osborne. Several of the Redden children, among them Osborne Redden, adopted the name Redding because it was often misspelled by the general public because of the similar sounds. Mike Gillick Jr. made his livelihood as a striptease lounge owner and was known for his role in the murders of a politically prominent Biloxi couple. Died of cancer at age 82 on Saturday, April 22nd, 2012, in his Biloxi home. Mr. Gillick and his lounges, the Golden Nugget and the Dream Room, were fixtures of Biloxi's tourist strip for decades. He used to stand in front of his beachfront building in the afternoons and watch traffic pass or sip coffee with friends across the street at a Krispy Kreme Donuts. He also maintained an extensive network of criminal contacts in the Dixie Mafia, a loosely organized band of criminals drawn to the coast by nightclubs and illegal gambling. Gillick and an imprisoned criminal associate from the Dixie Mafia planned the murders of former circuit court judge Judge Vincent Jerome Sherry Jr. and his wife, former Biloxi councilwoman Margaret Joyce Smith Sherry. A professional hitman gunned them down in their home September 14, 1987. The case brought unwanted national attention to Biloxi, resulting in 2 books and talk of a feature-length film. Gillick, for years, denied any involvement in the murders, but he eventually identified the hitman and implicated former Biloxi Mayor Pete Hallett, Vincent Sherry's best friend, in the conspiracy. Mike's imprisoned crony, Dixie Mafia kingpin Kirksey McCord Nix Jr. wrongly believed that the money he sent to the Hallett and Sherry law office had been stolen by Vincent Sherry. Mike, Nix, and 2 others were convicted for their roles in the murder conspiracy in 1991. Other conspirators remained free. Keith Bell, then a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, started working on the case in 1989. The FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office kept the pressure on Mike, hauling him back to court on marijuana trafficking and witness tampering charges. By 1993, Bell said that Mike was ready to talk. Having been an FBI agent for 25 years, including being assigned to the San Francisco and Los Angeles offices for about 10 years, Bell said, "I know firsthand how very difficult it is for someone involved in criminal activities for a lengthy period of time to suddenly switch positions and cooperate with law enforcement authorities. They know, as Mr. Gillick knew, it meant a total break from his previous life, his friends and associates. There was no turning back. For Mr. Gillick's full cooperation with the federal government, I, as well as all law enforcement authorities involved with the investigation, fully appreciate what he did. I, as well as members of the Sherry family, am convinced that Mike fully realized and understood how very wrong he was for his involvement in the murders, and that he did, and will, forever regret his actions." Bell said that Mike's attorneys, Chet and Gail Nicholson of Gulfport, advised Mike during the legal travails that led him to become a federal witness. Mike was sentenced to 20 years in prison for helping plan the murders when he testified in a 1997 trial against the hitman and Hallett, both of whom were convicted of their roles in the conspiracy. The hitman later died in prison. Hallett, who served as mayor from 1989 to 1993, is scheduled to be released on April 2013 from federal prison in Oakdale, Louisiana, according to the Bureau of Prisons website. U.S. District Judge Charles Pickering Sr. released Mike from prison after 9 years in 2000, based on his cooperation. Mike spent his final years living quietly in the hometown he loved. Chet Nicholson eventually recorded a lengthy series of interviews with Mike and his wife, Frances. Partly based on those interviews, Nicholson wrote a fictional account of criminal exploits on the coast, Dream Room, Tales of the Dixie Mafia, published in 2009. Nicholson said that Mike lived a long and very eventful life. Although he did some things in his lifetime that I know he later came to regret, he experienced a religious conversion later in life, Nicholson said. While nobody can know what is in the heart of another person, I hope that he was sincere and that he is in a better place.
Biloxi, Mississippi. Monday, September 14th, 1987. It was a typically warm summer night in this quiet Gulf Coast town. The workday was over, and most residents had retreated to the tranquility of their homes. Like most of their neighbors, State Circuit Court Judge Vincent Sherry and his wife Margaret were unwinding after a long day. Vincent Sherry was a prominent judge in Biloxi. Margaret was making plans to run for mayor. Both were fixtures at Biloxi's social and community functions. They were a happy couple who had raised 3 grown children. Tomorrow they planned to visit their daughter out of state. Their life together seemed ideal. They were just settling in for the night when an unexpected visitor came to the door.
What are you doing here with that?
And brought their perfect world to an end. The Sherrys were supposed to be with their daughter, so no one realized anything was wrong until 2 days later when the judge failed to show up in court on Wednesday, September 16th. Calls to the Sherry's home went unanswered.
I'm sorry we can't take your call, but leave your message after the beep.
His colleagues at the court phoned Pete Halat,
Circuit Court's on line 2.
Vincent Sherry's friend and former law partner.
Morning, Pete Halat.
But he hadn't seen or heard from the judge either.
Well, he's supposed to be in court.
When did he leave?
I don't know.
All right.
No, wait, you let me call him at home, and I'll figure out where he is.
All right.
After he left a concerned message on the Sherry's answering machine, Halat felt he'd better check on his friend personally.
Oh, I got the machine. Judge, it's Pete. They're looking for you in court. Is everything okay?
On his way out, he asked his junior partner, Charles Legier, to ride with him.
Charlie, hold on, time to saddle up. I need some help, so let's go.
Listen, I'll give you a call back, okay? Yeah, bye-bye.
I figure if we go together, the two of us will fine.
As they drove, Legier tried to make conversation.
Finding out from lawyers.
Halat seemed distant, perhaps concerned about the judge. Both of the Sherry's cars stood in the driveway.
Well, the car's here.
I don't like it. Well, his car's here. He's supposed to be in court.
Halat asked Legier to go to the house, while he asked a neighbor if she'd seen the couple.
Just go ahead.
Legier rang the doorbell, but no one answered. He saw that the last two morning newspapers hadn't been picked up.
Pete Halat, I'm a partner.
The neighbor told Halat she hadn't seen the Sherrys for a couple of days, which she thought was odd since both of their cars were in the driveway. When Legier tried the Sherry's door, he found it unlocked. Something wasn't right.
Hey, Pete! Pete!
That's unusual.
Yeah, I was just knocking on it and the door opened up.
Halat, concerned by the open door, cautiously stepped inside. A few steps in, he made the gruesome discovery. Judge Sherry had been gunned down in his own home.
What's wrong?
They called the police. Authorities arrived to find the body of Vincent Sherry at the front of the house. In the back bedroom, they discovered Margaret. Because the couple was so prominent, the murder investigation became top priority. Detectives contacted the FBI's Biloxi field office. Though the FBI would not yet be officially involved, they offered the use of their agents and forensic laboratory. Inside, the police began scouring the crime scene for clues. They conducted blood spatter analysis to determine projectile angles. If they could figure out where the murderer had stood when he fired the shots, they might be able to reconstruct the crime.
Okay.
Inspector Robert Burris, a crime technician with the Biloxi Police Department, helped process the scene. He discovered a possible clue in the den.
There was blood trailing from his feet, actually going down between his legs a little ways, back to where he was laying. There was blood spatter on a double sliding glass door that was right beyond his head. And further examination in this room, I found some small pieces of foam rubber.
Burris didn't see where the foam rubber could have come from.
3 shell casings. Want to get those?
A search of the house led him to one conclusion.
Now, this foam rubber had to have been brought into the house. We examined every piece of material in this house, in every room of the house, all pillows, mattresses, everything else. There's no foam rubber tore up in this house. It was brought into the house. It does have gunshot residue on it. And basically about the only way it can get there is for a bullet to be fired through it.
For Burris, the significance of the foam rubber was obvious. The killer had used a homemade silencer. Investigators dusted for fingerprints, but found none of any value. They found 9 spent .22 caliber shell casings from a semi-automatic pistol, as well as the bullets used to murder the Sherrys. The position of the shells indicated that the shots had been fired in rapid succession. But most striking was how well the killer had covered his tracks. Nothing at the scene pointed to the killer's identity.
So what do you think?
He did his job well, and his mission was clear.
From the FBI.gov, on September 4th, 2012, a bite out of history, murder and the Dixie Mafia. This month marks the 25th anniversary of the murder of Judge Vincent Sherry and his wife Margaret, whose hands at the deaths of the so-called Dixie Mafia exposed the lawlessness and corruption that had overtaken Mississippi's Gulf Coast in the 1980s. It was out of control, said retired Special Agent Keith Bell, referring to the level of corruption in Biloxi and Harrison County, so much so that in 1983, federal authorities would designate the entire Harrison County Sheriff's Office as a criminal enterprise. Special Agent Royce Hignite initiated the investigation of the sheriff and was soon joined by Bell. They were doing anything and everything illegal down here, said Bell, who grew up on the Gulf Coast. For money, the sheriff and officers loyal to him would release prisoners from the county jail, safeguard drug shipments, and hide fugitives. Anything you could think of, they were involved in. Bell is quick to point out that there were plenty of honest officers on the force, and some would later help the FBI put an end to the culture of corruption in Biloxi. But for a long time, Sheriff Leroy Hobbs and his Dixie Mafia associates held sway. The Dixie Mafia had no ties to La Cosa Nostra. They were a loose confederation of thugs and crooks who conducted their criminal activity in the southeastern United States. When word got out that Biloxi, with its history of strip clubs and illicit gambling, was a safe haven, the criminals settled in. At the same time, members of the organization incarcerated at Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola were running a Lonely Hearts extortion scam with associates on the street. The scam targeted homosexuals and brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars, money they entrusted to their lawyer, Pete Hallett. Dixie Mafia inmates at the Louisiana State Penitentiary were behind a scam that ringleader Kirksey McCord Nix, a convicted murderer serving a life sentence without parole, believed if he used to raise enough money, he could buy his way out of jail. Here's how the scam worked. Inmates paid guards to use prison telephones. They then placed bogus ads in homosexual publications, claiming they were gay and looking for a new partner to move in with. The men who replied to the return post office box address got additional correspondence and racy pictures. But there was a catch. The scammers told their victims a variety of lies about why they needed the money before they could leave where they were. A lot of money came flowing in, said Keith Bell. There were hundreds of victims, men from all walks of life. Professors, mail carriers, politicians fell victim to the scam. One guy in Kansas mortgaged his house and sent $30,000 to the scammers over a period of months, Bell recalled. To add insult to injury, some of the inmates writing letters eventually confessed the scam to their victims, and then extorted even more money by threatening to out the men if their demands were not met. Pete Hallett, who would later become mayor of Biloxi, had spent the money. When it came time to hand it over to the crooks, he said the cash had been taken by his former law partner, Vincent Sherry. So the Dixie mob ordered a hit on Sherry, a sitting state circuit court judge who had no direct ties to the criminals. On September 14, 1987, Sherry and his wife were murdered in their home. Gulf Coast residents were shocked by the murders, Bell said. Local authorities worked the case unsuccessfully for 2 years. The FBI opened an investigation investigation in 1989, and Bell was assisted in the investigation by Captain Randy Cook of the revamped Sheriff's Office. Leroy Hobbs was convicted of racketeering in 1984 and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The federal investigation into the Sherry murders lasted for 8 years. In the final trial in 1997, Pete Hallett was sentenced to 18 years, Kirksey McCord Nix, as well as the hitman who killed the Sherrys, each received life sentences. As a result of the cases, Bell said, Gulf Coast citizens started demanding more professional law enforcement and better government. Bell, who wanted to be an FBI agent since he first watched the FBI television series as a child, added, "It meant a lot to me to return to my home and do something about the corruption that had worked its way into government and law enforcement there." He added, "The majority of citizens realized that if the FBI had not stepped in, the lawlessness and corruption would likely have continued unabated."
And they end up convicting 7 people in these murders. And the court cases are a mess. There's this one guy, Bobby Joe Fabian, and he is sort of in the middle of all of it. But he ties like the weirdest things together because he has been around in Southern organized crime just forever. And he's an informant who dies of natural causes in prison in 2012, which is very, very rare. A lot of these guys, they don't make it very long in prison.
From the Picayune item, on December 13, 2009, Mississippi takes Dixie Mafia inmate. The ailing Dixie Mafia inmate who linked prison telephone scams in Louisiana to the murders of a Mississippi judge and his wife has been moved to a Mississippi prison. Bobby Joe Fabian, 64, is now at the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility in Pearl, Mississippi. "I don't even want to get out. I'm just tired. I just want to lay low until I die, which I hope is sooner rather than later," he told the Advocate of Baton Rouge on September 30th before his transfer. Former U.S. Attorneys George Phillips and Brad Piggott of Mississippi credit Fabian with providing information that solved the September 14, 1987 slayings of Biloxi Circuit Court Judge Vincent Sherry and his wife Margaret, a former Biloxi councilwoman. Federal trials in 1991 and 1997 convicted former Angola inmate Kirksey McCord Nix Jr., former Biloxi Mayor Pete Hallett, strip club owner Mike Gillick, contract killer Thomas Holcomb, and others in the murder plot. Phillips, retired FBI agent Keith Bell, and Lynn Sposito, the Sherry's daughter, tried unsuccessfully for more than a decade to arrange Fabian's unconditional release to Mississippi, where he thought he might have a chance at freedom. He told the newspaper during an interview at Hunt Correctional Center in St. Gabriel, "There's no place in this state I can go because of who I am." His transfer was worked out in months of negotiations among federal authorities and corrections officials in Louisiana and Mississippi. Fabian's attorney, Cynthia Speetjens, says the agreement is between the two governors and she has not seen it. She said Mississippi agreed to take custody of Fabian for humanitarian reasons because he solved the Sherry murders and he was in danger in a Louisiana prison. Fabian was sentenced to life for aggravated kidnapping in Louisiana and life plus 30 years for murder and armed robbery in Mississippi. Fabian said he signed out of a federal witness protection program for prisoners on April 30th and spent more than 3 months in isolation at a Marianna, Florida federal facility before he was transferred to Hunt in early September. Louisiana officials still have a detainer on him as part of a long list of conditions for his transfer, Fabian said. "If Mississippi gets through with me, Louisiana still wants me," he said. Phillips, Bell, and others were heavily in support of some concessions being made to him, but this was the only concession we could get, Speetjens said. "I think he's reached that point in his life that he probably realizes he couldn't make it on the outside," Bell said. He said Fabian suffered a near-fatal heart attack in federal prison several years ago. "I've got a few miles on me. I took all the back roads," Fabian said. "I'd have to rob a bank to pay for all the medicine I take." He was sentenced for crimes committed over 3 months in 1970, beginning with his escape from federal custody in Oklahoma and ending with his arrest in Tallulah. Part of a loose-knit group of criminals the press dubbed the Dixie Mafia, Fabian pulled his gun on 2 officers who stopped him and a companion for a traffic violation. They were caught the day after Fabian took State Trooper Wendell Lewis and Deli Marshal Bill Curry to a secluded area and shot them in the legs. Bell told the Pardon Board that Lewis told him in 1992, the year before he died, that he would not object to Fabian's release. Lewis's widow said the same in 1994. Mississippi juries convicted Fabian of killing wealthy Memphis, Tennessee horse breeder and bond expert George Lennox and robbing the couple in West Point, Mississippi. Fabian recanted a confession. He said last month he did not kill Lennox but took the rap as a favor to an organized crime family. "I already had forever to do. when you're young and dumb. In the 1980s, Fabian, Nix, and other Angola inmates began running Lonely Hearts telephone scams that mainly targeted homosexuals who sent thousands of dollars, thinking they were helping young men get out of minor scrapes with the law, and joined them. Fabian estimated the ring may have collected $5 million. We thought we were beating child molesters. I never dreamed they'd pay that kind of money for that. Prosecutors said Nix ordered the Sherrys murdered because Hallett took money from Nix, but said Vincent Sherry had taken it. Fabian said he broke with Nix because Nix began taking too many chances, including letting his girlfriend bring marijuana into Angola while posing as a paralegal in Hallett's firm. U.S. Marshals moved Fabian from Angola in 1990. Kirksey was trying to make a move on me. Things were rocking back then. You play anybody short, and that's the last time you play them short, Fabian said. I'm glad I did something right before I go, but I sure wish some other people would do the right thing.
You know, Bobby Joe Fabian was the weirdest kind of snitch, too. He was not just a snitch, but he got glowing approval from a lot of the law enforcement and other authorities involved. What's interesting about him is I went back, I was trying to connect him to this guy Fats, and I did find an old newspaper article that connects him back to Tennessee and Mississippi as well, because I always wondered if he actually did that one murder that is referenced in these articles. Essentially, this guy's found in his Cadillac, and he's picked up in Tennessee, and he's dropped off in Mississippi in the car. Anyways, I'm going to talk about that one, but then I'm going to start tying all of this, put a little bow on this, because I wondered what would the head of the Dixie Mafia really look like. And that's sort of where we're going with this, and where I started chasing this. Say there were 5 Dixie Mafias or mobs or whatever. What would the head really look like? And would it be somebody like Bobby Joe Fabian, or would it be like this other thing I found?
From the Delta Democrat Times, on November 28, 1971, Fats, from juke joints to narcotics arrest. From Washington County juke house operator to indictment on a major murder and a widely publicized arrest on narcotics charges. That's the story of Nolan Ray Fats Williamson, as the Delta Democrat Times pieced it together through interviews with Mississippi law enforcement officers, attorneys, and nightclub operators in Bolivar and Washington counties. Most Greenvillians had no idea who Williamson of 1251 John Street here was last week when they heard television newsmen identify him as one of several persons arrested by narcotics agents after a shootout in Marietta, Georgia. Those who had talked with local lawmen or had been keeping up with Williamson in daily newspapers in Mississippi and Tennessee, however, must have realized that they had heard the name several times previously, and so they had. For although the general public does not know much about one of Greenville's most infamous citizens, sheriff's departments, police, and even the FBI have observed his activities for several years. That's because Williamson, who got his nickname because of his physique, has been a constant gadfly for Mid-Delta lawmen. These same Mid-Delta lawmen, especially those in Washington and Bolivar counties, shed no tears when word came that the big man with the thinning blonde hair and ruddy complexion had been arrested by federal narc agents and was being held on $50,000 bond. Williamson is charged with selling 20,000 narcotic tablets to an undercover agent. Tennessee and Marshall County, Mississippi authorities also have an interest in Williamson's arrest. He was being sought by the FBI for alleged interstate flight to avoid prosecution on a murder indictment returned by the Marshall County grand jury. A prisoner at Angola State Penitentiary in Louisiana, Bobby Joe Fabian, was indicted by the same grand jury on a charge of murdering the same man, millionaire bond dealer and Tennessee walking horse financier George Lennox of Collierville, Tennessee. Lennox was found in his gold Cadillac, shot to death, just across the Mississippi state line. Numerous newspapers, including the Memphis Commercial Appeal, gave the case and subsequent investigations by authorities in both states close coverage. The Commercial Appeal later reported Fabian had confessed to a reporter in an exclusive interview that Fabian shot Lennox in Tennessee, then drove him in the Cadillac to the spot in Mississippi. The newspaper quoted Fabian as saying he was sprung from an Oklahoma jail to pull the murder. The Commercial Appeal also quoted Fabian as saying the fat man acted as his contact and helped plan the killing. The newspaper said authorities were investigating the possibility that Williamson is the fat man. At a later hearing before a circuit court judge, however, Fabian testified that he was bribed to confess and claimed he was not connected with the Lennox slaying, in any way. At the same hearing, Circuit Court Judge Walter Brown ruled that the state had not proven it had jurisdiction and dismissed the charge against Fabian. The judge said it had not proved the crime was committed in Mississippi instead of in Tennessee. Marshall County authorities have appealed the decision. However, they have refused to even say publicly whether or not Williamson was also indicted. The Delta Democratic Times was told by Assistant U.S. Attorney Fallon Mason of Oxford recently, however, that his office based its decision to issue the federal warrant for Williamson's arrest partially on the basis of the murder indictment. Mason said the complaint filed before the warrant was issued said Williamson was indicted February 24th and that Detective Captain Tom Nance of the Greenville Police Department, now police chief, and confidential informers had reported Williamson was in Little Rock, Arkansas, and other parts of that state during a week in September. Nance told the DDT Friday that he got his information from another law enforcement agency. Williamson had been accused of numerous crimes, but his only felony conviction was overturned, according to local lawmen. One police department arrest cards, lists him as a juke house operator. Indeed, he did run one of the best-known juke houses in Washington County in the late 1960s, the Monkey Store, at the intersection of Mississippi 1 and Mississippi 452, south of Greenville. The Monkey Store, like most juke joints, catered to a group that worked hard during the day and played hard at night. The small club featured dancing and beer drinking and the other benefits to be reaped from the usual mid-Delta juke house. But although Fats loved to brag of his big money and connections with big-time criminals, lawmen could never link him close enough to a major crime to convict him, but brag he did. Confidential police reports reveal claims of several associates of Williamson that he never grew tired of boasting of his influence with criminals. Lawmen have established that he knew countless known or suspected criminals or gangsters in the Mid-South. Williamson has been seen in Hot Springs, Arkansas, Bossier City, Louisiana, West Memphis, Arkansas, and Memphis, Tennessee, as well as in Texas, Missouri, and Georgia. Fats Williamson, as far as the DDT has been able to learn, first appeared in the Mid-Delta about 1963 when he moved to Bolivar County and settled in the colorful Riverside, which through the years has seen more than its fair share of crime. About 1963, Williamson got Bonneau officials to allow him to build a nightclub in the site of the present Lawn Bank and began to offer beer and whiskey and sometimes women to dance and talk with. Williamson reportedly shared ownership of the club with Charlie Tilley of Greenville, a veteran juke joint operator and owner. The club and Williamson himself quickly experienced several brushes with the law, most notably the chief deputy sheriff on the Riverside, L.B. Williams of Rosedale. Williams was later elected sheriff and earlier this month was re-elected to a second term. It was here that Williamson received his first Mid-Delta conviction. L.B. Williams charged him with selling beer without a license, and he was fined. Not long afterward, the club burned to the ground, and Williamson soon began operating in Washington County full-time. The term full-time is used because he had already had a brush with Greenville police. That conflict came October 16, 1968, when Williamson was picked up while in a vehicle that police claimed included stolen property. The arrest also netted Williamson several lesser charges. He was charged with possession of gambling devices, carrying a concealed weapon, and having an improper driver's license. Municipal Court Judge Earl Solomon found Williamson guilty of each charge and fined him $150 for possession of gambling devices, in this case lottery tickets, $550 for the concealed weapon, and $100 in costs for the improper driver's license. With the aid of Greenville attorney Fountain Dawson, he appealed the convictions in Washington County Court. The concealed weapons and possession of gambling devices charges were passed to the files, but the improper license conviction was reversed. Then came a series of minor charges. On October 30th, 1968, he was charged with vagrancy. He was fined $55 and sentenced to 30 days in jail, but the charge passed in the files to a county appeal court. On November 11th, 1968, he was charged with no driver's license, and he was fined $40 in court costs. On April 28, 1969, a 4-month period of no charges was shattered by Williamson's arrest on a multitude of charges. Once again, he was convicted by the municipal court of carrying a concealed weapon. He was fined $100 and costs on that charge, $100 in costs for driving while under the influence of intoxicants, $100 in costs for having an improper driver's license, and $10 in costs for failure to dim his automobile's lights. All of these charges, with the aid of an attorney, Howard Dyer, were appealed in county court. The DWI charge was passed to the files, and Williamson pled guilty to the other charges, receiving fines of $100 in costs for the concealed weapons, $100 $218 in costs for failing to dim his lights, $10 and $2 cost for improper driver's license. On July 30th, 1969, police charged Williamson with possession of stolen property, but that charge was later dismissed. On December 5th, 1969, he was arrested and charged with no driver's license, DWI, careless and reckless driving, and drunkenness. Judge Solomon fined him $250 in costs for the DWI, $55 in costs for no license, $30 in costs for careless and reckless driving, and $15 for drunkenness. He was also sentenced to 90 days in jail for the DWI conviction. Again, all of the charges were appealed to county court. On January 23, 1970, he pleaded guilty in county court to no driver's license and was fined $55 in costs, guilty to drunkenness and was fined $13.50 in costs, and guilty to careless and reckless driving and fined $292 in costs. The DWI charge was passed to the files, keeping intact his record of not having spent more than a few hours in a Mid-Delta jail. Washington County came awfully close. On August 17, 1970, Williamson and 3 other men were indicted for burglary in connection with the theft of approximately $47,000 worth of agricultural pesticides, chiefly Treflin, from a Greenville warehouse. Williamson went to trial first. The state's chief witness, Bolivar County Penal Farm prisoner Lonnie Tacker, testified that he participated in the burglary, that Williamson organized the burglary, that he drove around outside the warehouse during the burglary, advising his friends by walkie-talkie when someone was nearby, and that he procured the truck used in the theft. A jury found Williamson guilty, and he was sentenced to 5 years in the state penitentiary. Later, however, the Mississippi Supreme Court overturned the convictions and remanded the case back to circuit court here for retrial. The higher court said a highway patrol search of the truck used in the burglary was improper. A patrolman investigated when he stopped the truck parked half on and half off Mississippi 1 near Rosedale. After talking to the driver, who explained that he had a flat and that the truck had failed to start and that he had sent for help, the patrolman became suspicious. He drove up the road, radioed headquarters for a search warrant, and returned to search the vehicle. The stolen pesticides, about 380 cases, were found. It was not that search, however, that the Supreme Court ruled unconstitutional. Later, officers removed more chemical from the truck while it was parked at the Bolivar County Jail in Cleveland. That entry, the court ruled, was unconstitutional. The burglary charge is still on the docket, but Assistant District Attorney Frank Carlton told the DDT an effort to try Williamson again will probably not be made in view of the charges against him in other states. Williamson is presently in the Cobb County Jail in Marietta, Georgia, where he wonders which charge he will be prosecuted on first, whether Mississippi authorities will drop the murder charge if their appeal is turned down, whether federal authorities will continue their investigation into the possibility that he may have aided in Fabian's escape from the Oklahoma prison, and whether Tennessee authorities will attempt to have him indicted for the Lennox murder, and whether Washington County authorities will seek extradition. Apparently, the federal charge of selling about 20,000 tablets of narcotics to an undercover agent in Marietta will be his first worry.
So for everything that you read about the Dixie Mafia, effectively what is articulated by the authorities in newspapers and press releases is that they've been dismantled. Probably by like 1995, 1996, there's no more Dixie Mafia. And they're sort of reticent to describe what the Dixie Mafia was in the first place, or they don't have the ability to describe it like you would describe like the Gambino crime family. Like it's not the same thing. Given that, and given who all have been involved, why do I think that like this Greg Martin case was related to all of this? Well, because around that time, shortly thereafter, I had a run-in with someone that the run-in ended me up. The run-in ended with me sitting at an interrogation table with the ATF and the FBI talking about who I now believe were members of the Dixie Mafia. And why would I tell you this story? Well, because what I saw and what I experienced and then what I immediately was able to research with court files has never been made into a news article or a book or a movie or anything. Not only has it not, there's one piece of media about this out there. It was, I don't want to trash the writer because it did a huge amount of research but it was written, it was sort of complicated to read, and I think I can translate it better in audio form, but it was complicated to read, and it was stitched into this one little newspaper and then promptly forgotten about. It's only been duplicated one time. I can't even find the original writer's name on it. I have a clipping of it. Meg was able to do a little research for me, and I had someone else do some research where they found like the series of articles, but they're not in reference, they're just in reference to like other articles. They're not written well enough that they picked up any traction and got any kind of wire attention. They didn't go viral, I guess. They didn't get wide coverage. The reason that this is important to me is because the person that they pulled me in to ask about looks like the sort of third composite in the Greg Martin case. The position that I was in, I was being held in contempt for something that had gone on. This is like in the period of time between September 11th and Christmas of 2001. I met this person, and he had a name similar to someone that I had been doing some work with. Where we were being held in the two instances that we ran into each other, he was very racist, but the population of the holding area was primarily African-American people in there. I was one of the only other white faces. So the whole reason I got pulled into the interrogation room was because they had assumed we had talked. And I did not have any conversations with him. But that stuck with me. Like, what is this person done? And they ran down a couple of things about him. So I knew his name, and I knew what the crime was supposed to be about. But this was not someone I was familiar with. This was not someone I had any ties to. Afterwards, it struck me, one, he resembled that composite, and I never got that out of my head. And the area and the lay of the land they described was, because they were asking me, did he say anything about this, say anything about this? So they're telling me some facts, sort of jumbled the way that they're telling the story, because they really just want to know if he had told me anything. And the truth was he hadn't. And that's that's ultimately how all of that ended. But I retained everything they said. And honestly, afterwards, I went and talked to him. I was in a position where I could go and do that. So I went and talked to him, and I just asked him a couple of questions, didn't get any more information. And there was no way I was going to have anything to do with this guy. I mean, I've met some scary people, but this was honestly the scariest person I have ever met, based on their descriptions of him and just based on everything I was able to research about him later. The only reason I'm telling this story now is because he's now deceased. And the people who are tied to this are mostly deceased. But this was probably, this was one of those things, if I had talked to him, he would have been my friend. Friend, I put that in big quotes. He would have gladly gleaned whatever information he could use, manipulated me into whatever situation he could have. But he was a really bad, scary criminal, honest to God, gangster dude. I just didn't know it, in the one or two encounters I had with him. And the encounters I had afterwards, I kept them very short. I was really just curious at that point at what they described, because they flat out told me they wanted him for a murder. That murder stuck out to me because I'd never read anything about it. I've never read anything in the news about it since. It's just this random murder. But the people that were tied to him were wanted for yet another murder. And as I combed through this, it wasn't, at that moment I thought, okay, I met a scary person. And from what they told me, I think he's involved in this and this. But he referenced this one thing. He said, the man that I farmed with. And it stuck out to me as I'm reading through these articles and all these relationships. That's one of the reasons Bobby Joe Fabian, his description of the fat man was very similar to how this guy said the man that I farmed with. And I was able to determine years later, who all the people connected to this were. And it's partly because of that one article that I was able to find, but it's because of going through all of these court records and finding all of these really tenuous criminal associations, but also associations related to the property and the deeds and everything that's going on there. And his is the story that I really want to tell, because it starts when he's really young, and it never rises to the level that it piques authorities' curiosity in the criminal sense And that's what the Dixie Mafia looks like. That's like this guy, he was on the radar, but it took years. Like, from the first time he did anything and got in trouble, he has this one stroke of luck that pushes him down a path where it would take years for authorities to find him again. And I think if you dug into this guy's past, you would find more things like Russell and Shirley Dermott. I don't think, okay, so to be clear, this guy's deceased by the time that happens. But it's people like him. Those are the Dixie Mafia.
From the North Carolina Court of Appeals, filed May 1st, 1987, a Pitt County grand jury returned true bills of indictment charging defendant Leo Henson with assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill, inflicting serious injury, possession of a handgun by a convicted felon, 2 counts of willful and wanton injury to personal property causing damage in excess of $200, 2 counts of assault upon a law enforcement officer, and 5 counts of assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill. Upon defendant's plea of not guilty, all of the charges were joined for trial. The state's evidence at trial tended to show that on the 24th of June 1985, at approximately 2:00 p.m., the defendant, Leo Henson, his wife, and their 3 children entered the yard of Grace Whitfield, defendant's aunt, in a pickup truck driven by the defendant's wife. Mrs. Whitfield's property is located adjacent to and west of the defendant's property, which is situated on the north side of a rural paved road in Farmville, North Carolina. After getting out of the truck, defendant began arguing with his wife about the keys to the vehicle. When she refused to give them to him, defendant grabbed Randy Whitfield, Grace Whitfield's 16-year-old son, by the front of his shirt. Randy broke free from the defendant's grip, ran through his mother's house, and hid in a cornfield in the backyard. From his position in the cornfield, he could hear gunshots and the defendant yelling. James Walston, who worked for the defendant, saw the defendant and his family enter Mrs. Whitfield's yard. He heard the Hensons arguing about the keys to the truck and began walking toward the defendant, who was obviously drunk, in order to keep him from driving. Walston saw the defendant fire a pistol into the air, then unload it and throw it on the ground at Mrs. Whitfield's feet. Both Walston and Randy Whitfield testified that the defendant was acting like he was not in his right mind or was crazy drunk. At approximately 3:00 p.m., Pitt County Sheriff's deputies Ivan Harris and Neil Elks were dispatched to Mrs. Whitfield's home to investigate a report that a man was drunk and was firing a gun. As they drove up the Whitfield driveway, the deputies, wearing plain clothes and operating an unmarked patrol car, observed the defendant standing behind a tree. The defendant was holding a board measuring 1 by 4 inches by approximately 5 feet long in his right hand. His left hand was clenched in a fist. The defendant approached the officer's car, cursing them and ordering them off the property. He reached through the open window and grabbed Deputy Elks by his necktie and tried to pull him out of the car. At about the same time, the defendant began to hit the windshield of the car with the board and continued to do so until the board broke. Deputy Elks drew his weapon and pointed it toward the defendant as he struggled to free himself. Deputy Harris began to back the patrol car out of the driveway, and the defendant released Deputy Elks. Deputy Harris parked the car a short distance from the driveway on the north side of the rural paved road, and the officers radioed for assistance. A short while later, uniformed deputy sheriffs Rick Fisher and Alan Edwards arrived in an unmarked patrol car and parked behind Deputy Harris's vehicle. Deputy Harvey Gardner also arrived and parked his unmarked patrol car in front of Deputy Harris's vehicle. The deputies were out of their vehicles and were awaiting a radio message concerning a warrant for the defendant's arrest when a green car, driven by Mrs. Whitfield, stopped alongside Deputy Gardner's patrol car. About the same time, the deputies heard the sound of an engine starting and saw the defendant driving a white 2.5-ton truck toward them on a path leading to the road from an area where some bulk tobacco barns were located. The deputies warned Mrs. Whitfield to move her car out of the way of the truck, so she moved it just off the northern shoulder of the road in front of Deputy Gardner's car. As the defendant approached the road, he was waving his left arm out the window of the truck and was screaming, "Stand right there, you son of a bitches, I'll kill you." The defendant made a left turn onto the roadway, then turned even more sharply left toward the deputies and Mrs. Whitfield, driving the truck into Mrs. Whitfield's car and then into Deputy Gardner's patrol car. 4 of the deputies drew their weapons and opened fire as they ran from out of the path of the defendant's truck. The defendant then turned the truck back toward the right, dragging the Whitfield car, and ran into a ditch off the southern shoulder of the roadway. The defendant was found lying on the front seat of the truck, wounded and still screaming. At the close of the state's evidence, the trial court dismissed the count which charged defendant with misdemeanor assault upon Deputy Harris. Defendant's motion to dismiss the remaining charges was denied. The defendant offered evidence tending to show that he had taken prescription painkillers for kidney stones and had consumed a fifth of liquor during the morning and afternoon preceding these events. Taking the stand on his own behalf, the defendant stated that after arguing with his his wife about the keys to the truck. He got an automatic pistol out of the bolt bin in his workshop. He testified that because he was drunk, he got a little loud, and that when Mrs. Whitfield came out of her house, she saw the gun and told him to give it to her. Defendant stated that he couldn't get the gun unloaded, so while on his own property, he fired the gun into the air to empty it and then threw it unloaded on the ground at her feet. Defendant further testified that when he went back into his shop, everything started turning around and upside down, and that he doesn't remember anything else until waking up in the emergency room of the Pitt County Memorial Hospital. The defendant's motions to dismiss, renewed at the close of all the evidence, were denied. The jury returned verdicts convicting defendant of misdemeanor assault upon Deputy Elks while in the performance of his duties as a law enforcement officer, willful and wanton injury to Mrs. Whitfield's automobile, causing damage of more than $200, willful and wanton injury to the Pitt County patrol car driven by Deputy Gardner, causing damage in excess of $200, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and 5 counts of felonious assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill. He was acquitted of feloniously assaulting Mrs. Whitfield. Judgments were entered upon the verdict sentencing defendant to active terms of imprisonment. The defendant appeals.
So this guy, Leo Hinton, for the record, his appeal is denied. There's no error. But the reason that they do that, I could read you all like 30 pages of this. It's not that interesting to hear the 30 pages. Here's what's interesting about it. He has no defense because he claims that he can't remember anything. Therefore, whatever argument he would posit in his own defense, or his lawyers, would be hypothetical. It's hypothetical because he can't remember anything. And he stated that. It's probably true. So at this point, this is 1985 that this happened. This is 1987 that we're reading the appeal because it takes months and months and months. This guy already has a 1984 conviction that basically netted him on a maximum sentence of, I think, 4 years. It's either 3.5 or 4 years. He spends a year and change in jail, and he gets out. So he gets out in 1985. He's a felon, and then this happens. But from here, he's literally on probation in 1985 when this event occurs for the previous charge, and they stack it. They give him 6 years, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. There's some of them are concurrent, some of them are consecutive. But the gist of it was he was supposed to be in prison until December 1999. You would think that like people might learn their lesson. For a while, he doesn't really get in trouble again. And I think his time in jail made him a better criminal. But what it did was it connected him to a lot of people. That's what his time in jail really did. It gave him the connections to sort of, I think of it as like he's getting like his PhD in his criminal behavior. He gets out in October of 1992, and he doesn't get arrested again for 10 years. But when he does, it's like a really big deal. And that's when things really get interesting.
Thanks for joining us. This podcast was made possible by LabrottieCreations.com. That's LABROTTIECREATIONS.com. Check out the merchandise and specifically their fun pop pet art custom pieces made from photos of your very own pet. Use the promo code CRIMEXS for 20% off a fun, brightly colored, happy piece of art for your own pet at their site, LabrottieCreations.com. Music in this episode was licensed for True Crime XS. You can reach us at our website, TrueCrimeXS.com, or at our email at truecrimexs@gmail.com. You can leave us a voice message or call us or text us at 252-365-5593. Please like and subscribe if you want to hear more. You can come over and check us out at patreon.com, sometimes on Twitter and Instagram, all at TrueCrimeXS.
This is True Crime XS.
What can you say in as much detail as you can about why you suspect there may be more than one culprit?
Well, it's simplistic, really, at least from our eyes from that standpoint. You have Mr. Derman's body in the garage, and the body's decapitated. And that, I've certainly butchered deer and things like that before. That takes a little effort to do that, even if the person's not alive. And then we have Mrs. Derman's body in the lake 5 miles away, at least 5 miles away, down towards over on the Greene County side of the lake. And while it's possible, you know, but you got two people that are separated now. You've got a woman that weighed approximately 150 pounds. We know she was killed before she was, you know, placed in the water. We do know that from the autopsy. Plus she was struck in the head. It's just very unlikely, in my opinion, that one person did that. You know, you might have the drop on me, but if you're going to kill my wife, or you're going to, you know, I'm going to fight with you. If it's nobody but me, you're going to shoot me in the back, because if I can't do anything else, I'm going to try to run. But I'm just saying, it's, once again, I use the term frequently. When we look at the totality of it, it certainly indicates to me that more than one person was involved in it.
Why do you think this crime may have happened, if you had to use your best guess?
Well, I think that, you know, the Dermans were probably targeted because of something that they had or something people thought they had. Okay. I think that was it, and or some sort of extortion. You know what I'm saying? That didn't go through. I mean, the circumstances, all of which I can't discuss, but the circumstances that we have here, and their lack of any kind of criminal association or anything like that, two retired elderly people in an exclusive neighborhood that is not on any major thoroughfare. I realize the lake is open, but we're not talking about the intercoastal waterway here either.
Now, what would be your personal best guess about maybe the psychological makeup or overall nature of the person or persons responsible?
Well, I'm not going to have I'm certainly not qualified to, but in the world of hardcore policing, I would say it was a particularly brutal savage that did that. Whether he did it as a result of self-preservation or he did it as a result of just pure meanness, it takes a certain level of depravity to throw an 88-year-old woman in a lake and cut the head off of an 88-year-old man.
Sheriff, I know you don't have Mr. Derman's head, but we know that Mrs. Derman died from some sort of blunt force trauma. Does that say anything to you that these people may not have used firearms?
Well, they definitely didn't use firearms on Mrs. Derman as far as the cause of death, but that doesn't mean they didn't use firearms during the initial assault or something like that. But, firearms, of course, leave evidence behind more so than ball bat or something like that.
There have been cases in Georgia where a perpetrator has sawed off a dead person's head to prevent law enforcement from retrieving bullets.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in this business 40 years. I don't ever recall a head being taken away for that, but that certainly could be a possibility. I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, you know, we obviously have evidence concealed because we have the body of Mrs. Derman concealed, or at least very much attempted to be concealed. And of course, you know, throwing bodies in lakes and wells and things like that that's always the purpose of it. It's not, there's no other purpose in that other than to conceal evidence and buy time.
Is there anything you're trying to protect out there on the lake, or will anything be roped off during the holiday, or is there anything that people need to be looking out for, or what is suspicious that they can call about? Or
I hate to be graphic, but obviously, you know, or sound crude, but obviously we're still looking for Mr. Derman's head. I mean, if that scene out there or something like that scene, we need to know. I'm going to have deputies on Marine Patrol and Lake Sinclair and Lake Oconee like we always do on Memorial Day. DNR, I'm sure, will be out there too. We're going to, this is a big case, and it's a terrible case, but the Sheriff's Office goes on. It's been there since 1807, and it still has its duties to do, so we're going to be out there doing our thing. They've instructed us that they don't want people trespassing on this property, and we, of course, will attempt to keep that from happening as best we can. We got to concentrate on what we know. Where we go is driven not by speculation, but by the evidence that we have. And evidence is not always, certainly, in most cases, it's not some forensic thing. It's witnesses and records and things, some tangible things. And we can speculate as long as we want. I know, during the York case, I found myself constantly wondering why people would get involved in such a thing. And finally, I got to the point where I said, I got to quit wondering about that and wonder about the evidence and move on. And that's what I'm stressing now. We do have certain things that we know, and some of those we're not going to elaborate about, but that's where we're going. And I'm sitting here with court orders for records and things like that, and those are real things, not things that we speculate about what people do. Real things lead to real results.
Can you share with us anything about what Mr. and Mrs. Derman may have been doing at the time of this? By that I mean clothing at all? Can you share what they had on?
Can't. I don't want to go into what they had on, but there's nothing. I can just say there's nothing unusual about what they had on that would make us think anything out of the way. I mean, she was fully clothed, and no evidence of any kind of sexual assault or anything like that. But there's nothing to indicate. They weren't. They were supposed to go to a party on Saturday. The attire they had on would not have been appropriate at that, but it would have been appropriate what anybody would be wearing, around their home.
So I know you've been asked a lot about time frames and timelines, and I don't know if you want to share that with us.
My timeline hadn't changed. This happened Friday or Saturday, we think, and sometime Friday, sometime Friday afternoon till Saturday afternoon. We had about a 24-hour window that I'd love to neck down to 2 minutes. But
can you share with us anything as far as what you're doing now, new, or is it just hard police work?
We're just steady, hard police work. It's like I said, we plowing hard ground at Rockville with a dull point and a slow mule. And if you were from Putnam County, you know where Rockville is. There's a lot of rocks there. Of course, people don't know anything about plowing mules, and I'll be honest with you, I know a limited amount about it from being a child around it, but I know what a dull point is, and I know what hard ground is, and that's what we're doing, and that's it may sound comical, but that's what we're doing. We're pushing with proven tactics and proven methods to gather evidence and information in a case like this. And I'm certainly open to any innovative technique that there is, but we're doing it the way we've been trained to do, and our experience has led us to do, and along with the assets and technical expertise of the FBI assisting us too. I cannot go into the details. There are things that we found out that I can't elaborate on. But the main push, like I said, most crimes are solved by somebody telling somebody something. Somebody knows about this, and we want them to call us and tell us in some way what happened. It would certainly help us.